Welcome to the 615 Sessions podcast on this Friday. The offseason is supposed to be a time for, some level of reflection, some level of kind of zen, but not when you cover the Tennessee Titans, as is the case for our good buddy and colleague, Ran Davenport of ESPN, who joins us now on the podcast. TD, I hate that we cover a football team whose offseason tends to be more interesting than their regular season, but I'll just speak on my behalf and not yours. How you living this week, brother?
Hey, listen, just trying to survive snow apocalypse. We're doing what we can, but you're right, man. This team, the offseason is like last year was so much better than during the year, and they figured out a way to get the number one pick and do enough crazy stuff to where nobody is talking about
it. It takes a special kind of awful, if I'm being completely honest with you, to allow a fan base just such a brief window of hope before they start taking things away, like their general manager or their voice of the Titans, for example, which is all happening.
Yeah, it's what do you? It's a mess.
Yeah, truly. So I know you've spoke at length on your podcast, Talking with TD, available wherever podcasts are downloaded. You've spoke at length on 102.5 The Game, where, of course, you make regular appearances. So I don't want to necessarily put you in reruns here, but the news of the week. The news of the week is Ran Carthon being relieved of his duties 2 years into the job. And Tehran, based on conversations that I've had this week, they were trying to move, or they were interested in moving on from him, potentially as early as the start of this season that they just went through, and decided to ride it out anyway for reasons that only they could answer and probably won't answer at this point in time. So I'd like to cede the floor to you at this point, because you and I have talked about this. I've been calling people snakes and weasels and spineless and all manner of other shit, because I'm very not in love with the way that all of this went down, even though I was not real keen on keeping the things that they had in place, but I didn't think one person deserved to have their head rolled for what happened here. So I'll let you take the floor.
Yeah. Look, it's interesting. I'll start with this. It was one of those things where either they all had to go or they all had to stay. One or the other. You don't just, okay, it's your fault, especially when you're preaching collaboration and walking lockstep. What we have here is collaboration without consequence for everyone except for Ran Carthon. I'll be frank, Ran, and I told Ran that it wasn't good enough. Was telling him throughout the year, it's not good enough. You guys didn't do this. You didn't address right tackle, and so on and so forth. So this isn't a defense of Ran Carthon. All this is that he was scapegoated and it wasn't right. And then for me, these letters that they send to the season ticket holders, the message that they're putting out there, patience, right? Again, we have two things going like this. Because you're asking the fans to be patient, but you're not being patient with the front office, right? You're not being truly patient with the head coach. Because I know if I were Brian Callahan, I would be sitting there like this, scratching my head and sweating, because he's next. In the summertime when you take that nice ribeye and you season it up and you put the marinade on it and you set it there before you put it on the grill. Yeah, that's Callahan right now. He's that steak that's being marinated, ready to get thrown on the grill. And I think it's one of those situations, honestly, where it's like, it's either you or me, and it ain't going to be me. And I think that's really what it boiled down to. When you look at this whole thing, I'm just curious how they managed to funnel all the blame to Ran Carthon. Well, no, I'm not curious. I see how they did it, but I'm curious how they could swallow doing that. And it's unfortunate. And I'll tell you this also, it's not going to really affect the play, but the morale. I wish we could be in the locker room right now and put a camera in these guys, because some of the guys, a la Jeffrey Simmons, Calvin Ridley, like they can't hide how they feel. I'm not saying that those guys reached out to me, but there have been some players that I reached out to, and they're like, "What the F?" So There's a lot of displeasure. I had an assistant GM candidate. Well, assistant GM, that's a candidate. I had them reach out to me and say, what the hell is going on over there? I wouldn't touch it. I mean, I'm just saying.
But Teron, they have, and they'll make their gripes publicly or privately, because I'm sure you and I have had similar level of discourse. Maybe I've been a little more, harsh in my level of discourse this week, which I feel completely justified in, and they can just basically eat it at this point in time for what they have done, and the decision-making process squarely on them that has led them to not only be a miserable football team, but an operation that is questionable, if I'm being diplomatic. Questionable at
Highly
best,
questionable.
if I'm being diplomatic. And a bunch of people we have both had conversations and of some level about this job and what this job is exactly, based on the parameters that they've outlined and whether or not that job would be attractive. They have the number 1 overall pick. There is some level of attraction to being able to have the leverage, whether it's the player or just the leverage alone of what the number 1 overall pick can present to you. But I would not in good conscience recommend this job to anybody.
No.
Not that anybody's asking my opinion, but and that's no one's fault but their own, TD. And you and I believe, are on the same page about this.
Yeah, absolutely. We're on the same page about it. I mean, they've made this situation so cloudy. You got the NFL itself saying, hey, look, I got to look into this and see what exactly is this role. When is the last time you ever heard the league have to figure out, okay, what is the actual GM role? Like, is this really a GM that you're offering? Is this a job? Because they were literally about to block select candidates from being able to interview. This is that questionable. So yeah, you're right. They put themselves in a situation where it's so volatile. There are going to be candidates that don't touch it, but it's one of 32 jobs. It's one of 3 jobs available this year. So they're going to have. So I think it's up to 9 or 10 now. Now that John Eric Sullivan has gotten the request, and in my opinion, he's going to get the job. It's going to be he or Reggie McKenzie, one of those two.
Yeah, and those two have connections to both Chad Brinker and Brian Callahan in some form or fashion. Well, John Eric Sullivan connections to Chad Brinker, not to Brian Callahan necessarily, but Reggie McKenzie with connections to both at this point in time. And just my position, Teron, is, because to your point, they have made this conversation about everything but the number 1 overall pick, except with the people that they're interviewing this job for, which is insane, because they have so many things that are critical to get right in this draft process. And yet somehow, through, again, fault of only their own, they have made it about anything else but the football, which makes me crazy. Not just because I think they're wasting our time, but because I think they're wasting everybody's time with this crap. And, ultimately, however they proceed, a lot of this dialogue will matter less if they do get things right moving forward and lead themselves to a path that shows meaningful improvement and competitiveness on the football field. But we got 9 months until we're ever even remotely able to discern whether or not they've done this shit right here. And I don't know how. I mean, you obviously have a great deal of engagement with the fan base via social media or via the various platforms that you speak to them on or speak with them on. I don't know. I don't know if there's worse vibes around a franchise, with plenty of franchises up in the air right now. This has been a pretty tough week for Titans fans.
Yeah, this has probably been the most venom I've ever heard from this fan base. It really has.
This
and
fan base has
saying
venom to it.
Do they ever? Trust me, I know, and too. But it's probably the most ever. Before that, I would have said last year, around this time with Mike Vrabel. But it's just the way things have happened in succession. Like you had 3 consecutive years of firing, and the fans are just like, "What the heck?" I don't get it. And after going 3-14, I think the fans are just like they had it up to here.
Yeah, no, there's some level of just wash my hands of it
Mm-hmm.
until such time as they earn the trust back, and that's what feels like it's been broken here, among other things. So a level of trust between an organization and a fan base that certain promises were made to a certain extent, and Ran Carthon not faultless in that with the level of expectation that was set ultimately, but I think that in particular the optics of moving on from Ran and him being the only one, whether or not it's just optics, I'll leave it at optics. Whether or not somebody else wants to jump to conclusions about what happened there, both to Ran and Anthony Robinson, frankly, and I wouldn't pretend to have to know those two men on much more of a personal level, other than I had a fine working relationship with both of them. I thoroughly enjoyed my time getting to know both of them. And ultimately, I think that the job that they did left something to be desired. And I've expressed, my thoughts on that in a variety of different ways. But again, the optics of this, with everything that's been around this franchise over the course of time, from them being named in the Rooney Rule to them trying to push through Rooney Rule violations, to them being trying to push through a new stadium, and all the different things that they've said versus the actions that they've taken. And again, I'm looking squarely at Ran Carthon in this particular situation and being like, but I don't know that you were the one who was most at fault here. In fact, I have reason to believe that you were far from the person to have the most amount of fault here versus an organization that moved the goalposts on you.
I know that there are 2 or 3 deals that people hate. More, it wasn't him, but unfortunately, that's not information that could be put out there. And, I feel Rand was a pawn in this whole chess game. I'll put it that way. I think when you look at this, how everything has worked out, getting the league support to do the stadium, I think when you look at the way this smear campaign has happened, I mean, are you really serious? You're white gloving this man to the point where you're watching his actions on the plane flight home? It is that deep. I mean, you're taking a mirror and putting it under his nose to check and make sure he's breathing. Like, come on. And I say that jokingly. Obviously, that didn't happen. But they are watching him enough to where they're looking to make sure that he's asleep on the plane. Like, that is ridiculous. The whole thing about leaving pro day early, right? Well, I tell you, the SEC network had the pro day, okay? When they got a hold of the pro day, because of the programming and everything, it shifted it back 35 to 40 minutes, okay? So it lasted a little bit longer than initially it was supposed to. Ran Carthon had to leave. He had a family engagement. He had to leave early because of the family engagement. And it ended up being early because the programming pushed it back. You see where context is important? Give you some other context that is conveniently left out. He was the one that went to Kentucky to look at Will Levis. We leave out that trip that he made there, right? We leave out some of the other. There's multiple trips that he's made. So I think what we need to do also is understand that he watched the whole work. They weren't there to see anything but Will Levis. Let's, be honest about this. He watched the workout he needed to watch and had to go. But because we're white gloving it, any little mishap was going to be magnified. And that's what we have here, because they did not expect the blowback, not only from the fan base. I don't think they expected from us, frankly, but most importantly, across the league. They didn't expect that. So the smear campaign is out. And look, it's textbook the way it happened. You spoke on it the other day. I'm just going to leave it alone, but it's textbook what they've done.
Yeah. And I think that, I think that whatever level of sensitivity, heightened sensitivity that they have about this particular situation, I would be careful to those people who are, again, publicly or privately, expressing that level of sensitivity about why you feel so sensitive about these particular situations that you are now being either accused of or people are jumping to conclusions on because you have led them directly down that path. And there's some people,
Yep.
In the comment section as we live stream the podcast today talking about, our level of being upset or whatever. And Teron, you and I have talked about this before. Like, we get paid to do a job and we do the job. But at the end of the day, we work with a lot of people on a personal level, individuals, not just a logo, right? The logo is the part of it, but there are hundreds of different people that we cross paths with in our respective roles who represent that logo in some form or fashion. And when you see a person who you know to be a good person, whether or not they are good enough at the job that they are doing, those things can be debated at some length, and there's probably pros and cons on both sides, as I'm sure both of us have talked about in some form or fashion.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, it's about how you treat people. And the way that, I think, is the emphasis of the outrage that they are currently experiencing, because whether or not they feel like they've treated people fairly internally, the optics are hideous.
The optics are hideous. And I tell you what, like, if they got rid of everybody, I would have been like, dang, man, it's messed up. But I get it. 9 wins, 2 years, 3 wins in Brian Callahan's first year. I get it. But when you start saying, okay, this is his fault, everything else is not, and we're going to get rid of him. And not only are we going to get rid of him, we're going to assassinate his character. My thing is this. Okay, yeah, he didn't do good enough. Was it really necessary? Was it really necessary to have those comments come out? Was it really necessary? Is it really necessary to feed information saying the building is united about the decision? Are you serious? Think about it, Buck. Bert does an awesome job, right? But if I'm giving props, Bert does an awesome job. But if they moved on from Bert, are you going to throw a fit? You're going to, you're not going to like it, of course, but you're going to continue to do your job.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Especially if it had the same optics that this situation does. You're going to just do your job. You know what I mean? Because you see what could happen if you allow other things to factor in. You know what I mean? So it's just the same. Of course, everybody in the building is going to remain status quo, because if you don't, you already see what could happen in the game of Survivor that apparently seems to be going on in there. So I'll just say that.
Your tweet to that effect.
Say it again.
I thoroughly enjoyed your tweet.
Oh yeah,
effect, by the way.
And, I don't, but it's a mess, man.
But again, Teron, because I'm a hothead, whatever. Like, I say a bunch of shit, and I pop off at the mouth way too often, and nobody, half the time people should just ignore me and move on with their day. But like, when you lend your voice to, and not with the same tone that I have tone problems. But when you lend your voice and your credibility to things that you see going on here, that means something. That truly means something to this fan base because of who you are, the way that you conduct your business, the way that you go about this job, the correct way, and the way that you prioritize personal relationships to that effect in truly getting to know these people in ways that's not always been the treatment that specifically athletes get in the way that they're discussed and the way that they're covered. And certainly dealing with a general manager who is a former athlete himself. And again, the opportunities that only come available so often, and how it was the optics around this particular opportunity and how this person got here versus what was being talked about on the way out the door. The mistake is on them. If they didn't feel that he was qualified for the job and they got some level of advice to it, it's on them. Everything that's happened here, it's not on Ran Carthon as far as I'm concerned. It's on them. And they know that. Which is why I think they're so damn uncomfortable about every time one of us cracks a microphone or gets on Twitter talking about I almost said a bad word, but talking about what the hell they've been doing over there.
Yeah. And if these things were really such an issue and were occurring, Why give the man a 4-year contract? Do you see? So it's yeah, it's textbook, like I said.
Yeah. So on to the general manager. Again, I don't want to take too much of your time, but you have obviously
No, we're
reported
good.
on a variety of different candidates that they are meeting. The list is an impressive one, flat out. But the question is, how attractive is this job from your conversations at this point? And I know we're very premature in the process, even though the interview process will begin in earnest today and through tomorrow. What kind of sense are you getting from around the league about the way this job is viewed?
Yeah, I think the only people, the feedback that I've gotten is those who are willing to take the job and the best people for the job is the ones who feel that they have a relationship and are comfortable going into it with Chad Brinker. And I understand it because obviously you're going to have him right here. You know, hey, I like that decision, but we might want to go this way. Like you're going to have that input there, so you have to be willing to have that level of trust and taking that risk because for some you get this shot and it's not always another opportunity. I look at it that way. I think also you have to look at the Packer influence. I think that's heavy when you look at John Eric Sullivan. I believe he's going to be the guy. I think it's going to be either he or Reggie McKenzie. But I know there are other people within the Green Bay organization that I would imagine are going to be pulled in that direction to Nashville to join in some other type of role too.
And of course, what's on everybody's mind is the number 1 overall pick. I'm watching Abdul Carter last night, as I know you've broken down tape on him, and that dude's doing it on one arm basically yesterday. Just still an absolute force, and I would argue worthy of the number 1 overall pick, which makes the conversation more interesting around quarterbacks, and people will have their various evaluations of quarterbacks. Again, you want to talk about stuff that is leaked out there about various people or various prospects. Nothing is dirtier than the draft process when it comes to that particular part of it. And not my place to say that it seems to be particularly, slanted when there are 2 black quarterbacks at the top of the draft. That's not my place to say that, but that I don't think that people should ignore that part of it either, where Bill Polian famously is saying that Lamar Jackson should be a wide receiver instead of now borderline a 3-time MVP at quarterback, whatever. That's neither here nor there. I don't want to, get any more outraged than I've already been about the last that week, basically at this point. But from your estimation, and based on what they have versus what they need to acquire, the boxes that they need to again check this offseason, how would you at least initially approach, prior to pro days, combine, all these other things, how would you initially approach this particular selection?
Yeah, I would really work to trade back, but a lot of that is going to depend on how things work on the veteran quarterback side of things. I no longer believe Derek Carr is someone, and it has nothing to do with Ran not being there. I just don't, other people that I've talked to, I'm not so sure Derek Carr is going to be the guy that they would take. I think, you look at some of the other veterans, that what they do is really going to dictate how things go with that pick. But me personally, I'm looking to find a way to move back. And I think when you look, you can't go any further past Carolina, and even going down that far, like to 8, I think you're still taking a risk. I wouldn't go. The Giants at 3 are the ideal, and this is something that I've mentioned for a couple of weeks now. You move back to 3, you acquire another first. I think you definitely have to get a 3rd this year, and I would try to get some other pick somewhere this year, or a 3rd or 4th next year, something along those lines. And what I do, I go back to 3. I take Abdul Carter. I think when you look at this guy, I mean, you're getting a Hassan Reddick, Micah Parsons type of player, and he's impact. He helps your pass rushing. So I think you look there, you try to get a right tackle at some point. I think safety is another need. Receiver was an option, and a guy that I had on day 2 that I thought would be really good to look at, Kyron Lacy. I don't know if you've seen the LSU receiver.
Yeah.
But he just got charged with felony hit and run, aggravated murder. Yeah, so that one's out of there, and unfortunately, it's a person lost their life in a car accident, and he left the scene.
Yeah.
And the person that lost their life was a Marine, ex-Marine. So that's out of there. But I wanted to, just bring that up because I thought that was a really crazy situation. But I think, you look at a guy like Emeka Buka. I think you go later, like a Jimmy Horn, especially if you don't address a slot receiver. Jimmy Horn gives you a guy that can play the slot and also be a returner. I think you look at those types, and even the Miami receiver. I always mispronounce his name. He wears number 7. Put it like that. He's a good option as well later. So you got to address a lot, though. Safety is another one that not many people are talking about, but you do have to fix that.
Yeah, and again, it's about the leverage, not just the selection in and of itself. Because today, and you don't wish harm upon anybody, but it does directly benefit the Tennessee Titans with the number 1 overall pick. The news on DeShaun Watson today that he has again retorn his Achilles as a part of the rehabilitation process. He's likely going to miss 2025. We understood that the Browns would probably be in the quarterback market anyway, and they're picking second currently. But for teams trying to get up into that quarterback discussion, you now present them with additional leverage. So an unfortunate circumstance for the person and the player on the part of DeShaun Watson, but potentially an advantageous situation for a team trying to, further leverage or further increase their own leverage with many teams at this point in need of quarterback play, whether they end up starting these rookies right out of the gate or they, hopefully give them some time to develop as NFL players. But we understand that that's not quite the norm at this point in time. Teron, the only other thing that I'd like to touch on here quickly is Mike Keith leaving. I know that you are a dedicated Titans radio listener on Sundays because they help inform us when there's not noise for us in the press box, obviously to help keep tabs on things that are happening on the field. Mike Keith moving on to become the voice of the Vols. Any thoughts on the way out the door before we wrap this one up today?
Yeah, listen, the man got choked up when he talked about that job a few years ago. So you understand what he's doing. You hate to see him go because I'll say there's 2. Like when I think of teams, there are 2 guys. When I think of the team, I do think of their play-by-play guy, and Mike Keith with the Titans and Merrill Reese with the Eagles. If you haven't heard him, you listen to an Eagles broadcast and you'll see what I'm saying. These 2 are the best. And so Mike Keith, ultimate class. I would love to be able to have his approach to every day, have his approach just to everything, because you never see the man upset. I can't think of anyone who has said anything bad about him. I know people they like to say bad things about me, and I would love to be in that type of light to where I've affected everybody to the point where, you can't say a bad thing about him.
Well, that's just because those people don't know you well enough on a personal level, Teron. But there's no disputing the character of you and the way that you conduct yourself and the way that you interact. Again, one of the best people I know, and not just because he's my buddy, Teron Davenport.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man.
That's because I don't have a career without Teron.
Nah, don't say that. You helped me get on radio. What are you talking about?
Shit. Anyway, TD, I so appreciate your time. I'm going to leave the audience with the Mike Keith highlight package that our friend Ashley Farrell put together for them on the way out the door. But, buddy, we'll soldier through another offseason for this football program. And we'll get it done. Talking with TD, wherever you get your podcasts, especially this time of year. You should be listening to the podcast anyway, but especially at this time of year when you know this man is grinding the tape on the draft prospects and talking to the people around these players and helping you get to know all the people who will be involved with this. There are few better resources than that. And, of course, you can hear him on a regular basis on 102.5 The Game. Thank you, TD. Always a pleasure.
For sure. See you later this month.
Dyson matched up with the rookie Fisher on the right. Lorenzo Neal is in the game at fullback. McNair takes a straight drop. He's now flush to his right. He fires. There's Dyson at the 5. Dyson goes into the end zone untouched. Touchdown! Titans! Martin and Kenzie to the right. Levis, deep drop. Has time. Firing downfield. Going for Oliver. No, it's Martin! Tay Martin cuts in front of Oliver, catches the ball, and goes into the end zone. Touchdown, Titans! Do the Titans have a miracle left in them in what has been a magical season to this point? If they do, they need it now. Christie kicks it high and short. Going to be fielded by Lorenzo.